Jesus did have a tendency to offend people. We talk about the big crowds that he assembled, but there are times that those crowds, went away. They're like, this is hard. I don't know if I want to do that. And I wonder if this might be some of the topics that he talked about, well, we know he did, that maybe at times drove people away, because it is countercultural for sure. He did say in the beginning of his sermon here, partway in, that he did not come to abolish the law, but to fulfill the law. And then he quoted a number of Old Testament laws that are still in effect, bringing some clarity to them, showing us that God's intent was us to move them from this external head knowledge, legalistic I checklist type thing, into the heart where our attitudes and our hearts change, where we want to be more like God wants us to live. And that's what he's addressing here. For example, last week we looked at the law that says, do not murder. And most of us, I hope, can raise our hands and say, yes, I've never murdered anyone. I've been clear of that one. But then he says, yeah, that's great. But the point is, I don't want you to be so angry at someone that you wish they were dead. I don't want you to have bitterness and anger just festering in you, because that leads to the kind of attitude that leads to hatred, which ultimately leads to murder. So he says, let's cut it off way before you get there so you don't murder anybody. That's what he's getting at. Today he pulls out another Old Testament law that says, do not commit adultery. That was a great Old Testament law. That's a good one, right? Faithfulness is important. Faithfulness keeps families together. But God is looking for more than just simply not being intimate with people outside of your marriage. He's looking for something deeper than that. His desire is for us to keep our hearts and our intentions with people pure. So he goes a step further. He says in Matthew 5:27, you have heard it said, do not commit adultery. Yep, they heard that's in the law. It's in the law. It's in the Ten Commandments, right? It says, but, verse 28, I tell you, everyone who looks at a woman lustfully has already committed adultery with her in his heart. If your right eye causes you to sin, gouge it out, throw it away. For it's better that you lose one of the parts of your body than for your whole body to be thrown into hell. And if your right hand causes you to sin, cut it off, throw it away. It's better for you to lose one of the parts of your body than for your whole body to go into hell. That's pretty tough language there. Jesus were using words like hell and judgment, is intended, it's also obviously what he's talking about here. Well, let's look at the law first. What's this thing? Do not commit adultery. It's gone back for centuries. It's been there as long as we know, right? Now, I'll clarify a couple biblical terms you'll hear thrown around once in a while. It's throughout the Old and New Testament, but sometimes we just throw these words out and assume people know what they mean. One is fornication. Fornication, that is intimacy between two unmarried people. So you're not married, you're not committed to marriage, but you're having intimate acts together. That's called fornication in the Bible. Adultery is when at least one of those people are married. So not to each other, but to someone else. So then it becomes adultery when someone who is married is with someone else. That's what the Bible calls adultery. And God laid this law down thousands of years ago, making it extremely clear that sexual intimacy is designed from the designer to be something between a man and a woman, and that they would be together for life. And that's just how he planned it. That's how he designed it. In the earliest days of civilization, long before there were governments, long before there were religious institutions or courthouses that you could go to and have a license signed, that says you're married, long before any of that, the point of marriage was not the document or a ceremony at a courthouse. The point of marriage was the moment two people came together in intimacy. That's when Jesus said the two became one, right? It's something deeper than the physical act. There is a spiritual bonding that takes place there that we don't see, we don't understand, but it's there. And this is the moment of marriage in Old Testament Scripture, like I said, before civilization was really even developing, and it's really still is today, whatever man-made stuff we put around it, that's the moment it happens. Now that's an extremely unpopular view in the world, that this moment of marriage. This is why the Bible teaches to save intimacy for the commitment of marriage. You don't just run around and be with everybody you can, because you're becoming one with everybody you can. That's why the Bible teaches not to have multiple partners, which, like I said, is a very unpopular view in the world. It always has been. It's not just unpopular today. It's not like, boy, society sure has gone downhill. It's always been unpopular in the world. And surprisingly, it's even somewhat unpopular in the church. Maybe not said out loud, but in actions. C.S. Lewis wrote, "Chastity is the most unpopular of all the Christian virtues." Let that sink in a little bit. Maybe part of the challenge for believers is that, and you hear this a lot, and I've said it, we live in such a sensual society, a sexualized society. We're continually surrounded by sexual content and images and just messages and songs and music. Everything's just thrown at you. It's very sensual, and it continually leads to temptation. I don't have to tell you it's everywhere. You know it. I don't have to even, you just know it's everywhere. You can't escape it. But honestly, it's always been that way. It's not just in our lifetime. We might think it's gotten worse or better or whatever, but it's always been around that way. Pagan temples were what we would call a modern-day brothel. I mean, they were just homes of prostitutes. Men would go to worship. They would go and hang out with the priests where they would worship their gods. They were just nothing more than prostitutes. The Asherah poles that you read about all through the Old Testament, one generation would build them, the next generation would cut them down, like, oh, we're going back to God. The next generation would build them up again. Oh, we're doing Asherah poles. What those were often very large statues of male sex organs where people gathered around in public places to have large orgies, all right? So you're bringing little Billy to school, and you're like, oh, look at the little orgy over there, look the other way, honey. I mean, it's always been a very sensual society. Not much has really changed other than we've moved our worship in many ways of these pagan gods into the privacy of our homes, where we enter their temples through various screens or through internet connections and things like that. So it's still happening. It's still all the same thing. It just looks a little different. Now, Jesus moves the intent of the law here from just the physical act, where you can say, have you ever been with someone other than your spouse? Oh, yes, no, I mean, you're going to have different answers, right? But he moves that from the physical act to the attitude of the heart that leads to the physical act. So it's not only have you ever been with someone other than your spouse, but have you ever thought it'd be kind of cool to be with someone who's not your spouse? That goes to a different place. It's in verse 28. I tell you, anyone who looks at a woman lustfully has already committed adultery with her in his heart. Of course, this is talking to a male-dominated world. In our world, it doesn't matter if you're a man lusting after a woman lusting after a man. We were all lusting after Dave this morning as he was doing his communion. Did he leave? Not really. But it's any desire you have for someone else who's not your spouse. The Greek word for lust here is a word that means passion or flame. That's not a surprise. It's this burning thing, right? It refers to that strong, burning desire towards someone. And what kicks this whole thing into gear is the word that precedes it, the word that says looks. When a man looks at a woman lustfully, he's already committed adultery in his heart. The Greek word here for looks, that we translate looks, means to keep on looking. So it's not just like a, hey, that's a attractive person, and you move on. It's like a, hey, then like, hey, right? It's the second look. It's the gaze that you begin to really focus in on that person. Now, you can't help the first look. It's just going to happen. You can't help it if you're watching a movie and suddenly you see something that you kind of wish you hadn't seen, right? Like, oh, I didn't know that was there. You didn't know that was going to happen. Even though it's not a total shock these days, it's still like you weren't looking for that. You can't help it if it just happens. You can't help it if you're working out and someone walks by who assumed they were at a nudist beach, and it's like, no, this is a public gym. Put some clothes on. Please. You can't help it if they do that. You can't help it if you're driving down the road and someone jogs in front of you who obviously really wants you to look at them and how wonderful shape they might be in. The first look isn't a sin. You can't help that. It's the second look. It's the prolonged look. It's that longing gaze where you begin to think and you can feel the heart begin to burn and lust begins and the fans the sparks into a flame. And that's when the heart begins to move toward impurity. It's that gaze that does it. And what Jesus is saying here is well, don't take the second look. You can't help it. But you're walking by and there's an ashtray pool and all kinds of, you're like, whoa! You're like, well, don't stare at it. Don't think, man, I sure wish I wasn't a Christian or I'd jump in. It's like, no. You keep on going. You don't do the second look. James 1:14, James addresses the issue here. He says, each person is tempted when he's drawn away and enticed by his own evil desire. We all have evil desires in us, right? Verse 5, then, after desire has conceived, it gives birth to sin. It starts in the heart and it works toward action. It gives birth to sin. And when sin is fully grown, it gives birth to death. So the temptation isn't at the first look. Can't help that. Temptation comes when that desire is conceived. Like, I wasn't even thinking about that, and now that's all I can think about, right? The desire is conceived when we're enticed by our own evil impulses. So you see something once, you look away, everything's good. See something twice, start fixating on it. Desire is conceived, it grows, gives birth to sin, which leads to death. Now James is talking about spiritual death, eternal death, but there's a quicker death that happens too. There's a practical, immediate death when we act out on evil impulses. It can lead to the death of trust between two individuals. It can lead to the death of a marriage. I can't trust you anymore. I can't be married to you anymore. It leads to the death of a person's integrity. I know what you're thinking. I know where you're going. Those are potential side effects of giving in to the impulse of the second look. So King David is out walking in his palace one day, and he's looking down over the city of Jerusalem, and he sees a beautiful woman taking a bath. Now, a king walking along the palace, that's not unusual. That's just, you just do that, right? Actually, in that culture, a woman on top of the roof taking a bath, that's not uncommon. That's where they do it. They don't have plumbing. They don't have 4 bedrooms and 2 bathrooms or 3 bathrooms in David-era Jerusalem. They often had their little baths up on the top, and that was where guests would sleep. It's also where the family would go and take baths. So it wasn't a completely uncommon thing or unthinkable thing to think David was up in his palace looking down over the city to see someone taking a bath. What was uncommon that day was the second look. It's like, hey, this gal's really attractive. It wasn't a sin to see her. He couldn't help that. It became a sin when he didn't look the other way. It became a sin when he didn't immediately walk back into the palace, like, whoa, bath time. Maybe I should do something else. It became a sin when he didn't keep walking to the other side of the palace. Like, there's 3 other directions I could be looking right now, but I chose to keep looking in her direction. He saw her, and then he looked again. And the longer he looked, the more he felt that inner spark, that burn begin, and it fanned into a raging flame, which led to him devising a plan. He sent someone, hey, go get her and bring her to my room. He engaged in intimacy with her, which ultimately led to the death of her husband and the death of that child that was conceived through that union later on. Now, according to Jesus, when did David cross the line? That moment when the knock came on the door and the soldiers, servants, whoever brought Bathsheba, we have a visitor? No, it was earlier at the second look. When he was looking around, he said, oh. It was when his heart triggered the plan, and then the plan took place. You can't escape being exposed to sexual material in our world today or any era of life. You can't help that, but you can discipline yourself to walk away from it. David chose not to. Now, to help you see the seriousness of not engaging the heart, Jesus says, you know what I want you to do is if you struggle with this, and we're all human, so that at some point, you're all going to struggle at some point, right? Take extreme measures. Go to extreme measures to protect yourself. Because you have to decide, is it the momentary thrill or the eternal hell? Which one are you going after here? Eternal life, I mean, that's what he compares it to, right? So he says, take extreme measures. Matthew 5:29. If your right eye causes you to sin, gouge it out, throw it away. It's better for you to lose one of the parts of your body than your whole body to be thrown into hell. If your right hand causes you to sin, cut it off, throw it away. It's better that you lose one of the parts of your body than for the whole body to go into hell. Now, before you get the sawzall out and start chopping, you understand this is hyperbole, right? He's not literally saying, hey, y'all, cut your hands off, cut your eyes out, or we all would have cut those things out a long time ago, or because we've all sinned with eyes and hands and feet and everything, right? It's what it is. It's hyperbole. It's an exaggeration to make a point here. Don't literally cut out your eye or cut off your hand, because about the time you cut your right eye out and your right hand off, you're like, okay, I got that out. Well, pretty soon now your left eye is sinning and your left hand, it's like, well, now what do you do? And like, okay, now my feet, so whatever, it just never stops. It won't end because you're human and we live in a fallen world. So he's using hyperbole here. What he's saying is, do whatever you have to do to prevent that second look from happening. Put safeguards in place. Even if they're extreme, do what you have to do to stop the second look. If that means canceling a gym membership, then cancel the gym membership. If that means if you're at a workplace and I don't know, you're across the office of someone your eyes just keep getting attracted to and you don't know how to stop, figure out a way if you can move your chair a different direction, move a computer screen, put a plant, whatever it is, whatever the rules are in your setting, do something so that you're not always looking at that person. Cut yourself off from that. Cancel streaming services that may cause you to gaze. And maybe it's time to just stop that thing. Is it my soul really worth $9.99 a month? I mean, really? Is that where it's at? Psychology Today conducted a survey a while back and found that 1/3 of married men and women admitted to having at least one extramarital affair. 1/3. And then they narrowed it down to people in their 40s. That number was higher. It jumped to 1/2 of all married people in their 40s said, yeah, we've had an affair. That's a lot. It's a lot of people. And you might think, well, that's Psychology Today. I mean, it's not exactly a spiritual Christian magazine. So what do you expect, right? People are people, right? Well, some of the Christian magazines did similar surveys. Leadership Magazine, specifically, is a magazine for church leaders, right? I did a poll of 1,000 pastors. 12% of them admitted to adultery. 12%. I wonder how many didn't admit it, but did do it, right? I don't know. But here's 23% admitted to some kind of inappropriate sexual contact, which, following Jesus' definition, would be adultery. So does that mean we're up to, 35%? I don't know how those figures, it gets a little gray in there, I guess. Christianity Today surveyed 1,000 of its subscribers. 23% of their subscribers admitted to having affairs. 45% admitted to having some kind of inappropriate sexual contact. Now, Christianity Today tends to be, their subscribers tend to be people who are the movers and shakers in the church. They're pastors, elders, teachers, ministry leaders, influencers. They're the people that are the bulk, they're the core of the church. And because they're all interested, they're getting these magazines to better equip themselves to learn, type of thing. And, almost half of them have had inappropriate physical contact with someone outside their marriage. More than that if you count the 23 who had actual physical contact. Again, probably who knows what's in the heart of someone's mind as they're answering that question, how they're defining things. These numbers are unacceptable in the church. This is not what Jesus called the church to. This is not what God called his people to. He said, we will live differently. He said, remember from the couple weeks ago, your righteousness must surpass that of the Pharisees. If you're going to be in my kingdom, you're going to live differently. And in the church today, there are people saying, we do what we want. We'll do what we want. Now, Jesus says you're going to avoid all of that when you take whatever measures necessary to stop it before it leads to death. A lot of you know my oldest brother died about 1.5 years ago. He's like 8 years older than me. He was never officially, as many of you know, never officially diagnosed with anything. We assume he was probably on the spectrum with autism, but they just didn't test for things back when he was a child. He was born 3 months premature in our home. Didn't even get to the hospital for several hours. So there was some oxygen. There's just things. With his growing up years, people just said, well, he's slow, right? He's just not interested in school. He dropped out, whatever, I was 8 years younger, so I don't pay attention. 10th, 11th grade, whatever. As soon as you could drop out, he dropped out of school, went on to get his GED, which is great. He had a good life and everything. But he wasn't like the kind of person that thrived in education circles. He had troubles like listening to doctors and understanding things that they would say. He didn't always make good personal choices, had a very simple, very, very good life. Well, a few years ago, they found skin cancer on his leg, which I shared with you at the time, so some of you know about that. And again, he had troubles understanding the doctors because I had questions. Well, what kind of skin cancer? It really matters how you approach this thing. There's different types of cancer. Well, he couldn't tell me, what kind of cancer it was. These big words, They scheduled a surgery to have it removed. And the day before the surgery, I called him and said, hey, I'm going to come up there and be with you and help you out, as to get you home and everything. And he said, I canceled the surgery. I didn't think I really needed that. Decided to go ahead and treat myself. I don't know. I'm not going to get into the how you treat cancer debate. That's not the point of this. But it's like his plan was, I've got a bottle of hydrogen peroxide. What else does one need to deal with the skin cancer? And so he politely declined my suggestion to maybe check back with the doctor to see if that's going to work or not. And I'd call him periodically to see how his cancer was doing, and he'd say, it's doing great. It's really looking better. I feel better, blah, blah, blah. And the hydrogen peroxide has just cleared it all up, and I'm all good now. And again, I suggest maybe you should check with a doctor and see what's really going on in there. You don't want to play around with this stuff. You don't want to pretend like you got it when you really don't. You might need to take some extreme measures here to get rid of that. And he insisted he could handle it, he'd be fine, and he was fine until he wasn't. And he passed out one day and couldn't get up, couldn't walk anymore, had to call an ambulance. They picked him up, they took tests, they did a couple things, did a little surgery, did another surgery a few days later, and when they opened him up for that surgery, they looked and said, man, it is everywhere. That cancer is everywhere. And they sewed him back up and said, we're sorry. I happened to be in the room at that moment. They said, we're sorry, there's nothing we can do. And it was just a few days later that he was gone. And again, I'm not here to debate how to effectively treat cancer. That's above my pay grade here. But what I am here to say is if he wouldn't have tried to fix it on his own, maybe he'd still be alive. If he took it more seriously and said, man, I've got to get proactive. I've got to get extreme. I've got to do something. I've got to get rid of this in my life. It's very well possible he could still be alive today. That's what Jesus is talking about here. Don't think your issue with lust is just going to go away on its own. Don't think to yourself, I've got this, when you never have up to this point in your life. You might have moments and victories and times when it's great, but overall, you haven't been successful in this. Don't think that a modest attempt to just kind of slow things down is going to work. A little hydrogen peroxide on your soul is not going to clean you up. It's going to take extreme action to remove the spiritual cancer growing inside you. And if you don't take that action, Jesus is saying here, it will potentially kill you. So take action before you lose your marriage. Take action before you find yourself somewhere where you don't belong. Take action before you make that biggest mistake of your life, walking along the palace, looking down, saying, hey, I've got an opportunity here I didn't realize I had, and letting your heart go there, and then the actions that follow. Do whatever you need to do to protect your heart from straying away from your spouse. Now, we don't have a lot of things, but we do have accountability groups here that meet throughout the week. We call them CAP, Christian Accountability Partners, people, you line this up on your own because it's got to be someone you trust, someone you can connect with and have conversations with. Because what you do is meet once a week and you have these questions that are very intentional and very serious. And one of them deals specifically with this issue. I think it's number 3 in the little pamphlet. There's little pamphlets out on the wall out there. One of the questions we ask each other is if your spouse could review a video of everything you saw and everything you thought last week. So that's getting to the heart, everything you did and everything you thought, right? Regarding sexual temptation, is there anything that would require forgiveness or explanation? How come you looked 3 times? Why did you longingly look at that person? Would you have to explain that to your spouse? Now, the beauty of that question, if you're answering honestly each week, is it motivates you to go to extreme measures to make corrections in your life. Because nobody wants to look someone in the eye and say, yeah, I don't really, whatever. I got hydrogen peroxide, I'm good. Maybe. You don't want to fail week after week after week as if it's no big deal. No one wants to admit that without doing something about it. So I would highly recommend finding a CAP partner. I really can't do that for you. It's got to be something you've got to do, someone you connect with. And there's no computer system that can match you up. But find someone you can sit down and have hard questions with and be honest with one another. And it doesn't happen like in the first meeting, It might take a year to develop that kind of thing. But that is an investment that is so critical. We've had so many people over the years involved with those, and it makes a difference in their lives. Now, to be honest, I had like a ton more of material I was going to cover today, and I got this far and thought, yeah, we're out of time. So the next couple sections of Scripture I'm just not going to hit today, and I'll figure out what to do with that because I have everything timed with the rest of the series to end with Easter, so I don't know what we'll do about that. But so we're going to end with this today, but here's the lesson, here's the take home. To live the Jesus way when it comes to sexual temptation, you don't take the second look. Can't help the first one. You don't take the second look. If you struggle in this area, don't assume it'll just go away. Get help, develop a plan, find accountability, act. Act on it. Don't just push it off or put your head in the sand and pretend it's not there. It's there, and it's growing, and it will kill you if you don't treat it. Let's pray.